works, thanks. Thanks for joining, everyone. My name is John Fokke. I lead the Threat Intelligence Department within Trellix. And I'd like to talk today, we have a little bit open up about some of the stuff we did in the past on REvil ransomware and how we helped take down this criminal empire and some of the lessons learned. We have a team all over the globe where we help our customers with intelligence questions that they might have. We also help gather threat intelligence that goes directly into our products. And one of the things that we also do is that when we uncover something that is worth the greater good or that we can think that we can advance law enforcement investigations with, we'll reach out. So this is a classic example of this as well. Before we jog our memory about REvil, we get our mandatory disclaimer for everyone. So what is REvil? Well, it made headline news with the Kaseya attacks, JBS. It was a ransomware group that operated from, basically, it was the continuation of the GandCrab ransomware group, and they were quite prolific. When we look back, we also had Conti, and now there's a dispersion of different other groups, so we have all these different things, but they were dominating the headlines, especially in 2019 and 2020. So how did they operate? When we look at it, we did a lot of research on this group. We also did some undercover work, and we studied their communication patterns. Some of the stuff we can talk about and some of the stuff we cannot go into details. But things that we did, we have the overview of how they worked. Their communication models, they predominantly communicated through Jabber. So they had a very large Jabber server. As many of you know, that Conti had a Jabber server as well. REvil did something similar, and by studying the communication from that server, we were able to establish that the core group had about 4 to 5 operators. So you had your developer, somebody who developed the actual binary, somebody who developed the backend system, so the Tor websites, all the communication, all that stuff, and you had a couple of admins that ran the affiliates. From the affiliate side, we saw about 40. So running about 40 people, which is different from GandCrab, because when we were working on GandCrab, we actually saw they had 150 affiliates at one moment in time. And it kind of made us wonder, it kind of grew over their head, they had some trouble with it, so they let GandCrab implode, took the most competent affiliates that they had, and started REvil. So how does it work? It's a very high-level overview. You get a binary as an affiliate, and you can spread it to your victims. Do you become an affiliate easily? No, you have a job interview. So this is the actual job interview or the job posting on XSS. It's interesting enough. In the past, we tried to be an affiliate for GandCrab, but we did not succeed eventually. We did learn out where their communication server was, so it did give us a lot. However, this is interesting if you look at it, because they're asking for some specifics that are very familiar if you're a sysadmin. So you need to know how to do your network address storage, some tape, maybe if you're pen testing, so you know the Metasploit framework, good old Cobalt Strike, and you know your way around an Active Directory, well, you can apply. You do have a 2-week trial period. It's not easy. Well, anyways, fast forward, if I'm an affiliate, I have my victim, and I can acquire a victim in multiple ways. I will request the ransomware binary, which I then load against a group of victims. And what we saw was actually a dispersion. So yes, you see the major organizations that made the headline news, the Kaseyas, the JBS, and whatever, but there are also affiliates that were predominantly targeting at end consumers, like smaller victims, but they were doing it at a larger scale. Whatever made money and delivered money back to the group was allowed. Predominantly a lot of individual victims we saw used exploit kits and botnets was predominantly in Asia, and the larger organizations, the affiliates, were targeting here within the US and in Europe. So when an organization gets ransomed, they would go into a ransomware negotiation, and the preferred method of payment is a Bitcoin address, or from Bitcoin. The payment would be done through an automatic portal, and eventually this model that they had in their ransomware as a service model was that a percentage of the extortion amount would go to the affiliate. In the contrary, Conti, which if you've studied the Conti leaks, they actually had more of a corporate structure where you got a pay stub. You got your pay every month or every week, and you did not get a percentage of the extortion. This one they did. So they had about 20 to 80 or 30 to 70 rule that they gave to their affiliates. And that's interesting, because you're aiming to run a criminal empire, and we'll talk about this a little bit more during the briefing. And you have a commission-based model where you want to commit your crime and you want to grow it, then it's very important that you know that you cash out or you pay your affiliates what they are owed. So they made headline news. We estimate that they're in the hundreds of millions, close to maybe $1 billion. We don't even have the exact amount of what they made through their ransomware, but they were successful. So where do you start if this is, like, you're looking at this threat group or any other threat group? So we're like, okay, where do we start with researching? So we took a little bit different approach. So we actually studied the success of REvil, and we're like, okay, what makes them so good and act them so well? And maybe we can find some mistakes in what they're doing there, or some dependencies. So if we know that they're dependent on certain procedures or other stuff, can we use that to our advantage? So by studying REvil, we actually established certain success factors, and you can actually translate these to other ransomware families as well. So one of the success factors is that they had a dedicated communication platform towards their victims versus an email communication. I'm not saying that an email communication-based ransomware group is not efficient or not good, but if you want to scale up your operations and you have X amount of affiliates or partners working for you, you need some kind of way to manage those communications. Heck, I have trouble answering my email in my own inbox, and I'm just one person. So if you have, like, you extort thousands of people, how do you do all those negotiations? Because that is a trick. So that's a key indicator. So if you look at a ransomware family or a ransomware group, there are groups that really want to grow as a conglomerate or as a ransomware as a service. You would see that when they move to a dedicated platform is a key indicator that they really want to step up their game. Another one is very interesting. A leak site to publish stolen data. That's a very common extortion method. We actually see it in the rise, stealing data and extorting people with it. But you can also argue, and this is the leak site from REvil at the time, Happy Blog, it is an excellent marketing method, right? It's your external marketing. When people see this, well, they get scared. They instill fear into their victims, so it works. So people know their name. Another one that is very essential is build stable malware. There is probably not another business like ransomware is probably the business where the ransomware actor is so heavily dependent on a stable piece of malware because it's essential to the business model. If it does not work or it does not decrypt, you basically have a wiper, or you disrupt the network, but you cannot bring it back. That reputation will precede you, and then nobody will pay you. Hence, your business model breaks. We've seen examples with Baubook ransomware, where they had trouble with a decryptor for their VMware, and it kind of led to the demise, because the admins make the malware, the affiliates do all the hard work, they penetrate the network, they spread and whatever, and then moment supreme, they launch the malware, and the victim is paying up, and the data is not going back. Well, as a criminal, you can say, like, oh, let's leave them as is, and we'll just go to the next one. But you can understand that this gives some trouble or some troubles internally in the organization. So, and REvil was very proud of their decryptor, actually, because on that same blog, they would quote security companies on how stable their decryptor was. All of that they did to convince their victims to pay. They say, like, hey, you're encrypted by us. If you pay up, our decryptor is stable. You can get your data back. Another indicator is an increase of affiliate spots, but with a very, very strict job application. So the screenshot I showed earlier where you saw the job application is a key indicator. What you would see with these groups that are really rising to the top, especially in the ransomware service groups, when they publicly announced this on the forums, they were opening up slots, and they were saying, like, hey, you can join us. It's like this popular company within the underground, where it's like, oh, we have a spot open, you can apply, but you have to go through the job offer. They weren't really begging for people. Everybody was knocking on their door to join their group, because everybody who joined had a prospect of making a lot of money. So you would see it as that they would be very blunt, and they would have a job interview, and they will ask you all kinds of questions. How did you know about them? Who referred you? And all these things, just to ensure that they have the right people. And it's essential. If you have the right affiliates as a criminal organization, it's a force multiplier. But if you have the wrong ones, yeah, it can work against you. You encrypt the wrong organization, that might backfire on you, and we see all these examples. Conti had a great example as well, where they grew to a certain size that a couple of their affiliates actually encrypted organizations that had a Russian nexus in that. They were encrypting an LLC, a Russian-based company, and that was against one of their ground rules. So you could see in the chats that they were like, oh, we should not do this, let's decrypt this, and let's make sure that they're okay, because, yeah, one of their affiliates slipped up. Another thing that we've seen is with cybercriminal operations is that when they come to a certain point, they start outsourcing in order to be successful. And that's like anyone here in this room. You have a skill set. You have a thing that you're really good at. But if you want to start your own company, guess what? You're doing payroll, you're the CTO, the CFO, the CEO, you're everything, right? Same with this company. When you start growing, you will get either people that have a certain skill set, but you will also find adjacent cybercriminal services that can help you accelerate. You can focus on your swim lane. It's very similar to like years back, we had a pizza shop, and the pizza shop had their own delivery vehicle that would deliver the pizzas. And he was doing it. Well, fast forward, now we have Uber Eats and whoever, what, Postmates or whatever. So the pizzeria just focused on someone making pizza, and the logistics is taking out of their hands, so they can focus on what they're good at. This is an example of the exploit forum, where actually the predecessor of GandCrab, and I sometimes use them a little bit interchangeably, because the core group is exactly the same, by the way, we're advertising for a crypto service. And that's a service to obfuscate their malware to evade AV, so to make it more undetectable. And the people who were part of this crime group could actually use this service for a discount or for free. Another example is that Bitcoin laundering services. So ReEvil at the time had an API that linked to a Bitcoin tumbling service called BitMixBiz. And all their affiliates, when they got a cash out, through the portal, it already got tumbled and laundered through that service out to their own account. Another thing, a slight hint in the first slide already, or in the second slide with the overview, is good administration. It's almost like you have to always pay your debts. If you do not pay your debts and you're not paying what people are owed, you will lose that loyalty. And that loyalty is paper thin in the underground. It's all based on payments. So there's no corporate loyalty in that way. So you have to find a way, if you're an organization and you want to scale your operation to a certain size, you have to find a way to attribute that one attack to that affiliate that's responsible so they can get their compensation. It's like almost like a sales force for criminals. So yeah, accounting is hard, but affiliate numbers help a little. They actually built a model or a configuration in each and individual binary that they launched, so every single piece of malware, where they had an individual number that they could actually link the victim to the responsible affiliate. So when we found this, we actually built a tool that we used internally, but also shared with law enforcement at the time, seeing like it's essential, because yes, you can have an attack, and somebody can be encrypted, and they could have a poster on your desktop saying, it is ReEvil, or whoever they want to call, Sonu Kibi. But it's not the name that encrypted you, it's an affiliate. So for law enforcement or for retribution purposes, you want to know who is responsible for what, because you can hold those accountable. And it's not a small business, it's multi-million-dollar stuff, and it has a real impact. So it is worth building that chain of evidence. So we have this tool, and it actually showed some real interesting stuff. So I touched upon the binary, that every binary had a configuration file. So this is just an overview of the configuration file. Mind you, the description we did not get. They were not as kind, so they didn't give it us. But there's a lot, but let's focus on the top two, the PID and sub-ID. So yes, it was labeled PID and sub. Those were the labels for that specific configuration that was attached to the ransomware binary. But we had to figure out what it was. And what was interesting when we looked at the PID was we see a numeric value that started around like 2 or 3, and it increased over time. But certain numbers reappeared. So when we looked at a binary, we pulled the extraction, and we was like, oh, PID 2 or 3 or 4. However, there were no numbers exceeding 40 at that time, but it was slowly increasing. So I was like, okay, if you look at the numbers, what kind of behavior is that? What could warrant that behavior? So we had the hypothesis that like maybe it is when an affiliate comes, they actually get a number attached to their name, and that's their number for the time that they're in the criminal group, and everything they do is tied back to that. Okay, so what's the sub? The sub numbers were interesting as well because they were of a much higher value. They ran into the thousands. But what we did see is that an affiliate number could have multiple sub-numbers, but a sub-number always had one affiliate number. So it was like a parent-child relationship. So the sub-ID or campaign ID actually ties back to the specific attack that the affiliate was undertaking. So you have an affiliate, let's say John, and he was attacking victim X, so he got a number for that specific attack. And that's the way how they link these things together. So when we figured this out, we were like, oh, we have an extraction tool. We figured out their roster sheet or the configuration. Oh, and we're also an endpoint vendor, and we have a lot of samples. Why don't we do some forensic accounting? So we basically wrote rules, and we gathered every single REvil sample that we could find to see, like, okay, can we build something, or can we see some patterns? So what you see here is just an animation of all the REvil samples that we gathered over an amount of time. On the right side, you see the actual MD5, and that it's tied into the campaign ID, and on the first one in the tree is the actual ID number. It's not really necessary that you could see everything, and I can understand that people in the back might have to have a binocular. But it does show, if you look at this, that some individuals are more active than others. So it's an interesting methodology to see, like, okay, who's the affiliate that does the most infections? Who's the one that requests the most samples? And if you can tie those into actual attacks, you can identify in this group of anonymous affiliates of this crime group, you can actually identify who's the most successful in your organization. It's almost like sales, right? Who's your most successful salesperson? And then when you talk about it we talk to law enforcement about it, it's like, okay, you have limited resources. You want to go after a certain individual. You want to make sure that if you want to break this crime group, how can you disrupt it? Well, you want to go after the head of the snake? You want to go after the low-hanging fruit? Or do you want to go after affiliates that actually form a pivotal role within the crime group? Because they're spreading their malware so far, they're actually bringing a lot of income. So if you can take those out, or you can disrupt them, or you can discourage, or whatever you can do within the tools of within the toolbox that you have, you can actually have an impact. And this was interesting. This is something that we actually published about, and this works. There's another key element that as we have seen in the recent past, has not always worked with a lot of cyber criminals because they're in there for the financial gain. So Lamborghinis and pictures of expensive watches and yachts are flooding the internet, but you have to stay humble. And this is where it became interesting. So we had these findings, and we actually published a blog at the time when Trellix was McAfee and FireEye, and this was from the McAfee side. And what we did, we kind of traced the money, and we saw something very interesting. On a forum, this is Exploit, I believe, there is one affiliate that we have identified, and the affiliate name is, the moniker name is Lalartu. And Lalartu, for the people in the back that might have trouble to read it, he posts something and he's bragging. And he says, vroom, vroom, mazafaka, we don't have to bleep that out. Don't be afraid, that's the sound of my Lamborghini growling. So it's interesting. You have classical criminals, gangsters, they pose with cars as well, and they're thinking, oh, he references a car, but he posed with something else, and that is not in that little square. So what is that? What is he posing with? It's not a Rolex watch, it's nothing else. It is Bitcoin transactions IDs from transactions he did in that weekend. Sorry? It's in the middle. We made it bigger. So what you see here are the transaction IDs of the transactions he did in one weekend. So he is bragging about how much income he got in one weekend from his extortion operation. So he kind of obfuscated them. So we didn't do those red dots. That's actually, he did that. But he did forget that if you have the first part, you can actually find the transaction ID on the blockchain. It's not that difficult. So we were able to trace it back, and we were confirming in our report that he made $300K in one weekend. Well, I'm telling you, that's not a bad paycheck, right? The security industry is pretty good, but this is a different type of paycheck. Well, he has to look over his shoulder, and we don't, luckily, so we're on the good side. This did not go unnoticed, because yes, you can make a lot of money, but to quote one of my favorite rappers, with more money come more problems, and that even goes for cyber criminals. Because, mind you, we published a report on this, and it was close to the holiday season at that time, and we got a note from our PR or our media department and said, like, John, we got somebody reaching out, and we don't know who it is, and they're doing something weird. And I was like, okay, well, I'll take a look. And it was somebody from a Proton Mail, and it had a different handle, and it was anonymous. And what it was somebody, and we call him the informant for this case, who was disgruntled. Lartu, the person we spoke about, owed him money. He did not get paid. One of the key success factors, pay what people are owed. If you don't do that, loyalty go out the door. So he actually reached out, and he said, I have information on Lartu, but I want to get paid. And we're like, yes, but that's not, internally we're like, that's unethical. We're not doing that. We're not that organization. So with our context that we were working with within law enforcement, we were able to establish a handover. However, this individual reached out on my corporate email, so I was chatting with possibly a cyber criminal through a corporate email. I had no time to do backstopping because they reached out to us. And then we reached out to law enforcement agencies, and they were like, that's great. Can you give us 2 weeks, and then we get the whole backstopping in order and everything, and then we can take over the contact. And well, if you ever done covert operations, waiting 2 weeks on a contact, it will dry up and they will walk away because they think they're not interested. So I was like, okay, it is what it is. Let's see if we can build a relationship with this individual. Mind you, we're not saying that we're going to pay him. We're playing the age-old trick. Yeah, I have to run it by my boss, and I'm just a worker, and I don't have authority. But anyways, we were trying to build a relationship, and it was very forthcoming. He shared a lot of info. So we asked him, it's like, okay, what's going on? And we were, based on the conversations, we established that he was a lower-tiered criminal selling info-stealer logs. And info-stealer logs, for those who are not familiar, is one of the key methods for a lot of ransomware criminals to gain an initial foothold in a network. So info stealers are like the gateway. They gather a lot of corporate credentials. Cyber criminals will buy those logs, will filter automatically through those logs, and find corporate credentials, VPN credentials, or whatever, try to attempt account takeover. When they have an account, they will then process or go through your network all the way to domain admin, and then yet or sys history, and then your company becomes a headline news. So what he did share, and this is really cool, because this was prior to like the stuff that got leaked on Conti. Tools, techniques, which tools that they use, what scripts did they use, how did they exfiltrate data. They did all kinds of things about like what did they look for info-steal logs. Basically a lot of the living off the land binaries that they did. So if you are interested in living off the land, we, two colleagues of ours, Tim Hux and Alfred, they're doing a talk tomorrow on living off the land binaries and everything you see about that. So highly recommended. And what's just interesting is this is one of my favorite ways of intelligence, right? You have it straight from the source. You have to validate it, but it's like snitch intelligence. So this works out really well. If you put this, if you're a vendor, you can understand that this, for us, is very helpful. If you're an XDR vendor, it's even more helpful because you can understand how they do what they do with which tools, so you can build your defenses around it. But this wasn't all. It got much better. So he's like, I said, like, okay, but how does it work? Where do you go? And he's like, oh, yeah, here's a screenshot. So apparently, the REvil backend had a visitors function, if you might call. So somebody who was an affiliate could allow somebody in a sort of demo account, so you can get into a demo, and you could see what was going on. So what you see is the actual backend of REvil. This is that comms platform that I was talking about. And on the left-hand side, you see the individual infections. In the middle is the zoom in on an individual infection, and on the right is like snippets of the chat. So think of this as your criminal Outlook or whatever management system you have. And it's interesting because these are actual infections that we could link. We did some research with a Dutch telco company who ran a sinkhole, and they were actually able to cross-link these victims with what they saw in the sinkhole. So the screenshot was legit. Then there's sounds built in and all kinds of stuff. So there was a sound, and if you hear this sound, a chat window popped up, and you could chat with your victim to negotiate about a price. And then our informant actually told us, like, well, and I asked about Lelartu, what his role was, what's his level within the organization, all these things. And when he talked about these screenshots, he said, Lelartu loves the sound of the coin. And I was like, what does that mean? And we were working on other stuff, and we actually have got a copy of the back end and some of the files. And apparently there is a soundbite that if somebody paid the ransom, there's an automatic sound that plays of a coin dropping on a table. Hence the sound of the coin. So that was what he was so favored about. So accounting is a bit of a double-edged sword. It works out really well for the criminals because you know what people are owed. And for the people that had really keen eyes in the front row, they could see that if you have the nickname Lelartu and within brackets, it says number 33. And then you have wax XXX and another number, and that's the campaign ID. So that number between the brackets is actually the 33, the PID. So we have a match. The theory is correct. And what is interesting, the data is in the back-end panel. So hypothetically speaking, if we have access to the back-end panel, you have their complete administration, and you can link every perpetrator to every victim. You have their complete admin, so you can roll out the books. Well, I did want to show something else as well that they still had in the panel, which was really funny, is every corporate entity has some kind of internal bonus program, right? You do well, you give each other an e-card or a bonus or whatever. These individuals had it as well. So they had a program where if you were happy with somebody, you were able to send them a bonus through, and it was actually a dollar amount that got laundered through the Bitcoin mixer and then ended up in the Bitcoin wallet of the other. And they linked it, and these are the actual animated GIFs that they had it. So for $100, and you have a $500, and the GIF has more and more pictures of money. So you get a Dave Chappelle for $750, and these are live. These are actual on the back end, so this was all shared with us. And it just goes on. Mind you, these bonuses are pretty steep. It's like, that's not bad. And it was funny to see that a lot of money was tied into this. And then we were talking to him, and he was sharing a lot of things. Like, you were trying to build a relationship. So there's when you do that, you often have, like, you try to build a personal bond. So the individual was telling he was expecting a baby son, and that was his reason to get out of cybercrime. That's why he wanted the money, and he wanted to live a good life. Well, face value for a criminal, you never know, but hey, for us that proved an angle to interact with this individual and to get some bit more information out of him. And it always helps when you do these things, just it's not to play dumb, but to have a conversation where you encourage the other person to tell more. So in this case, we asked this individual, okay, we saw the back end, we saw everything else, but could you explain in your own words, like, how do you get to this backend? How do you reach it? Because we already knew that they had a very extensive network for their own infrastructure, and we were just curious to see, like, okay, what does he know? And he said, oh yeah, you have to put in a sort of configuration file in your Tor RC file, and then you could go through Tor to a specific website, and it looks like this. And this is what he shared. Well, it doesn't really stand out. It's just a normal panel login. And he shared this with us. So we're like, okay. And we looked at the panel, and it wasn't Tor. The interesting thing is, and that's too small, but I can tell you about it, is the title of this panel. This panel was titled Private Project. And really, as a long shot, we were like, okay, standard operation procedure, what are all the other websites on the internet that are called Private Project? Mind you, there were 4 websites called Private Project, 3 of which were other malware, and 1 was this exact same website, which was very interesting because they took all these methods and all these measures to hide it on Tor, and through a Shodan search, we actually found the real IP. Oh, you can understand that, like, based on all the other research that we've done and like the communication method and everything else, we kind of like jumped in the air and we're like, whoa, this is great. So we wrote down all our findings, which was a 50-page report, and that went out to our law enforcement friends. And this was all prior to like Kaseya being attacked and all these other things. And then the rest is history. You saw Kaseya being attacked, and later on, the individual for Kaseya was actually arrested in Poland and extradited. And on the indictment, it promptly reads at the bottom, affiliate number 22. So that's another way of coming full circle. So in this case, the FBI has used the tool to identify that this person was affiliate number 22. We've shared with the community the real IP address of where the server was. We did not get a firm confirmation. That's always a bit tricky, right? But it was that through the location of the server and with some other means, they were able to establish that from the roster on the server, that number 22 was the one that was responsible for Kaseya. The individual has confessed, and I believe he's on trial, being trialed in June, or sentenced. And this is cool. This is why you do it, right? This helps out. So we see this, that eventually this led to an international organization. Eventually, we helped out identify multiple of these affiliates, because there's a whole part of underground investigation with this as well, because they were quite overt on the forums, so you can see who is vouching for what. If you link that up to those affiliate numbers and you see who's busy, we were able to identify certain people, or at least get some identifying markings, like, oh, this is a Gmail address, possibly linked. And eventually led that to the additional arrests of the affiliates and the seizure of $2.3 million from our friend Lalartu. Funny enough that after this, we're still in contact with several sources, and Lalartu is living in Russia, close to St. Petersburg, and the last information that we got is that he bought his girlfriend a BMW X5. So yes, he's hurt by the 2.3 million, but not too much. There's a lot of talk about ReEvo coming back, because yes, the Happy blog came live, and there were new victims, and yeah, the source code that we saw from the samples being used were actually older samples with the source code and the configuration file slightly altered. So there is still a collaboration amongst law enforcement and private sector to see what we can find, but a lot of things, the common hypothesis now, it has to be proven otherwise, it's unlikely that it's the same core group that is linked to ReEvo that is now doing this, just because they've done something similar in the past with GandCrab, where they got a lot of attention, and actually too much attention, and they decided to start a new group. So they kind of start with a new plate, to throw off the scent. It does not make sense to then continue your operation and refer to the old name. It would make more sense to start a new group and throw off the scent as well. And based on that the source code was not really altered, we believe that maybe somebody within the group was still with the private key access to the Tor blog, put it live, altered some of the binaries. So there might be that there are 1 or 2 individuals from the core group still involved. Some of the other individuals have moved to other ransomware operations as well. So yeah, we see that there's still people at large. They move from affiliate to affiliate, but this group has been disbanded. There is a nice reward out. We can no longer participate on this, unfortunately. But if you have any information, there's $10 million waiting for you. You just have to reach out to the FBI. And this is we kind of go to the lessons learned, right? So it does help if you study the success to find the weakness. And if I translate this to, let's see how the animation works. Oh, that works not right. We had the key success factors, a dedicated comms platform. We had the leak site, stable malware, the increase of affiliate spots, outsourcing, and all these things. So if we translate it to your organization, so what can we learn? They ran a criminal organization, so how can you translate to your security organization? Well, actually, automation of certain processes is key, because we can have the best individuals, but if you do not automate and you do not enhance automation or ML or these things and apply it in the right way, you're not going to keep up. You're not going to be able to scale. It is important if you run a security organization, especially if you're in a larger organization and security is not the top of mind, to promote your work, to show where you have value, show that return on investment. So you need to show that to the external stakeholders. That is something we can learn from the cybercriminals. They show their value through, okay, scaring the living daylights out of people with their blog and disclosing data, but I'm not saying you need to do that in your own organization, but it does help to show value from your security organization. And have a reliable product or service. Be proud of what you deliver. If you're a vendor and you sell security software, make sure that it works. Make sure that it's stable. Hire good people. It is literally it's better to have 5 lions than 500 sheep. That's what we always say. So if you better have capable people and give them the ability to operate, give them the ownership and the room to operate, will give you better results than you have 500 people that are just waiting for an order. Focus on the things you're good at and find your strategic partners to augment the things that you're doing. Look for the gaps in your operation. Look at where you're not as strong and find those strong partners that can help you out. And then credit where credit is due, especially in your own team. Give people within your teams credit. That will build loyalty, approach them, promote ownership, and all these things. And yeah, obviously you need to make payroll as well, because otherwise it's the same with cyber criminals. People jump ship. But pay is just one thing. Build that community. So these were some of the findings that we had from the ReEvil takedown, and I believe we're almost time for questions. So thank you.
I just want to know, what would have been your course of action if an informant had not come forward?
Sorry, if the informant?
Yeah, what would have been like, did you have a course of action, like another way of going about it if an informant had not come forward?
Oh, yes. So we had a lot of other data. What the informant did was, the screenshot really helped, because we had to find a lot of systems, and they did a lot of hiding. I'm confident that we will find other things, but we had a really good view of the organization, of whose role was, but the informant did help to paint it in, to give more color to okay, but these are the relationships in real time. So it helped us out. But some parts of the stuff that he shared we already found out, but for us it was a validation of what he's saying, that it's true. But ultimately some of the stuff we cannot share yet.
Thank you. I actually work for one of the companies mentioned in your slide. You mentioned Bitcoin quite frequently, but some of the payments were actually in Monero.
Monero, yeah, that's correct.
That made it much more difficult to track.
Yeah. They did offer Monero as well, but you see it's harder. Monero, I think the value of the Monero fluctuate quite a bit. So you would see, especially the negotiation firms that you have, they would prefer to go in Bitcoin just because it's, well, you know, it's traceable and it's more stable. So often they will try to defer to Bitcoin. You see, there is a mix that some want to have an alternative coin, but it seems like the common consensus is still on Bitcoin still.
Yeah, but the
Yeah.
JBS one wasn't.
Gotcha. Thanks.
So we have been observing that there's a new trend in ransomware groups like Karakurt or Bianlian. They move to encryptionless ransomware. They don't encrypt, they just extort. So do you think this will be a new trend? It will succeed? Because that's one of your success factors on your slide.
Well, yeah, if you run a ransomware as a service, as opposed to extortion, yes. What if your product has to be stable? It has to work, right? So, and we agree, we see the same thing. As you can see, this is quite the operation. You're dependent on having a back-end infrastructure that facilitates you with a piece of malware, and that malware has to work, and there's a lot of dependencies on it. And there are groups that say, like, well, we already did all the work. We penetrated the network. We exfiltrated the data. We might as well just set up our own website and start extorting people for the data. Predominantly, these are companies that deal in confidentiality, in like sensitive information, whereas the encrypted, the ransomware, is more effective against companies that are dependent on their availability, so like you're manufacturing or you want a plant to run. So there is something to say that there's a move towards this. That being said, you see that a lot of these groups, they built their own specialized tooling to exfiltrate data and to locate data, and that still has to work as well. If that doesn't work,
That's true. That's definitely true.
then you're still,
Yeah,
preferably
thank you.
screwed in that way.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I think we're there.
All right, if there's no more questions, thank you so much for coming in. I also ask that you fill out a survey, let us know how we did, and extra swag.
Thanks, everyone.